Tanner could only wonder how much good the call to Corey had done. It had cut off before he could get much out. There was no reason he couldn't survive on this island as long as necessary. There were plenty of roots he could eat, and he figured he'd be able to catch crabs and small sea life off the rocks close to shore. Fire wouldn't be a problem for an experienced camper like him. Chapter 24. Catherine had had headaches before, but never one like this. She wanted to rub her eyes, but couldn't move her hands. It took a moment for her to realize why. She was handcuffed. What had happened? There was a man with a sharp needle, and she noticed there was someone in the seat next to her now. "Welcome back, Miss Dalton," this man said. His voice sounded hollow, like an old phonograph record played at slow speed. "Wake up," Catherine told herself. "Make this fog go away and wake up." She narrowed her eyes, trying to focus. Who was this man? He was someone she should know, but who? With great effort, she managed a question. "Who are you?" "I see no reason for not answering your question at this point, Miss Dalton. I'm Zachary Wagner." The name hit with sobering impact. Catherine had never met Zachary Wagner, but she had seen him on the news numerous times. "Why am I wearing handcuffs?" she asked. "The cuffs are merely a precaution. You have no idea how badly I feel about you stumbling onto information you had no business seeing. I'm entirely aware of my son's feelings for you, and I had hoped someday to welcome you into the family. Killing you is going to bring me great pain, but my dear, it would seem you leave me no other choice." "You murdered Brandon," she said. "And Tanner, you've murdered him, haven't you?" "They left me no choice either, Miss Dalton." The pilot spoke up. "That's the island just up ahead, Mr. Wagner. We'll be on the ground in about 5 minutes. Catherine couldn't be certain, as all she could see of the pilot was his profile, but she strongly suspected he was the man who had drugged her in Vincent's car. "I haven't flown one of these things in years," the pilot continued, "but it's like they say about riding a bicycle. You never forget." "You're doing just fine, Winston," Zachary assured the man. Zachary pointed through the window. "You see that beautiful little island up ahead, Miss Dalton? That will become your final resting place. A very lovely spot, don't you agree?" Catherine sank lower in her seat as a feeling of complete helplessness tightened around her. The pilot had claimed to be rusty, and his landing proved him right. It was a rough one. Once they were on the ground, Zachary removed her handcuffs. "I see no reason to force any unnecessary discomfort on you, Miss Dalton. I take no joy in your demise. If it's any comfort, they say drowning is actually quite painless." "You are a monster," she spit out. "Think what you will, Miss Dalton, but I've designed the perfect execution chamber. I'll never be found out." Zachary removed the pistol from his belt and cocked the breech, injecting a shell into the chamber. "Just a precaution," he explained. Then he instructed Winston. "Stay with the chopper. Miss Dalton and I will only be a moment." "You may think you've gotten away with your little game," Catherine boldly stated as he forced her ahead of him across the beach. "But you made a mistake when you came up against Tanner Nelson. I promise you, he figured out a way to let someone know the things he learned about you. Count on it." Zachary suddenly froze in his tracks. "What the—" he gasped, staring at what was left of the boulder that had once blocked the cave entrance. Catherine instantly picked up on this. "Well now," she said, taking courage, "do we have a problem?" At that instant, the air was shattered by the sound of a tremendous explosion. Whirling around, Zachary suddenly turned ash-gray. "The chopper!" he gasped, seeing it in flames. "What happened?" "Tanner's alive!" Catherine cried. "Come and get me! I'm growing tired of bad company!" "Shut up!" Zachary snapped, gripping Catherine's arm tighter and forcing her back in the direction of the blazing chopper. "Winston!" he bellowed. "Where are you?" A muffled sound from overhead caught both Catherine's and Zachary's attention. Looking up, they spotted Winston dangling by a rope tossed over the stem of a palm frond. He was halfway up the tree, bound and gagged with duct tape. "Oops," Catherine jabbed. "Looks like Tanner got to your boy." "Shut up," Zachary barked, removing a cell phone from his blazer pocket. "I'm still in charge here as long as I have you where I can put a bullet in your skull." Zachary was doing a juggling act, trying to hold Catherine, the gun, and dial the phone all at the same time. Catherine was wise enough to know he didn't dare kill her now, not with her being his only ticket out of this predicament. She made a quick decision, and in a lightning-fast move, she yanked the phone from his hand and heaved it into the flaming helicopter. "You little witch!" Zachary bellowed. "Losing our temper, are we?" she asked, refusing to let up. "I know you're out there, Tanner," Zachary yelled. "Show yourself or I'll kill the girl." A rock struck the top of a palm tree, then fell to the ground, pulling Zachary's attention to a spot near them. He strained for a look. "What the?" he gasped. "Is that—" Refusing to lower his gun, he forced Catherine over for a closer look. "It's Conrad's chopper," he muttered at the discovery. "They never made it off the island." "Now you know," came Tanner's voice from behind them. Catherine spun to see him standing beside a large rock about 25 feet up the side of a small mountain. Zachary raised his gun and fired off 2 shots, which only ricocheted harmlessly away as Tanner easily ducked behind the rock. "So help me, Tanner," Zachary demanded. "If you don't show yourself, I will kill her." Tanner replied with confidence. "Katie's your shield, Wagner. Lose your shield and you'll never get off this island alive. By the way, Katie, thanks for depriving Wagner of his cell phone. I figured on having to do that myself." "Glad I could help," she half laughed and half sobbed. "Take a look at your cohort dangling from that tree," Tanner continued. "There's a cell phone taped to his shirt. That phone could be your only ticket off this island. But I've tucked away an explosive inside your fellow's pocket. I have my thumb against the detonator now. Care to talk trade, your cohort, and the phone for Katie? Don't destroy the cell phone. We'll talk." "How touching," Tanner laughed. "So much concern for your man's safety. Here's the way we do this. You release Katie and let her walk to me. When she reaches the large rock face just below me, I'll toss the detonator onto the beach. Oh, I didn't mention the detonator has a timing device on it, did I? I'll set the timer for 10 seconds. That should give you sufficient time to retrieve it and figure out how the disarming mechanism works." 10 seconds? Zachary gasped. "That's absurd. I need more time." "Put the gun down and I'll give you 30 seconds. Very slowly, Zachary bent down and laid the gun on the sand close to his feet. "Okay, now let Katie step far enough away so you can't grab her." Catherine pulled free and moved forward 3 very large steps. "Hold it!" Zachary shouted. "No further! Not until I see that detonator." Tanner emerged from behind the rock. "Are we ready to do this?" he asked. "Throw down the detonator!" Zachary barked. "On the count of 3, Tanner instructed. "When you hear me say 3, run faster than you've ever run before, Katie. 1, 2... Catching both Catherine and Zachary off guard, Tanner suddenly said, "I lied about the extra time. The detonator is set for 10 seconds. At the same time, as he cried, 3, he tossed something into the wake of an incoming wave. Catherine broke for the rock as Zachary's grunt told her he had grabbed the gun and was headed for the detonator. "This is unbearable," Brandon moaned. "All we can do is stand here watching. Why didn't the authorities give me an angelic zap gun so I could help save her?" "Angels don't use guns," Mitzi chided. "How about a sword, then?" "You're not that kind of angel, Brandon. Trust me, Tanner and Catherine will be fine. We both know Tanner's bomb is a bluff. What's to keep the jerk from shooting her?" "Zachary doesn't know it's a bluff, but won't he be surprised when he finds nothing but a rock?" Brandon looked to see Zachary frantically splashing through the water on his hands and knees while Catherine had already reached the rock, but he still couldn't help worrying about Zachary's gun. "Jump, Katie, grab my hand," Tanner cried to Catherine as she reached the rock. "It's okay, you're safe now," he said after pulling her up. "I thought you were dead," she sobbed. He wiped her face with his handkerchief. "You okay?" "I'm okay," she sniffed. "Good. We have to get you higher up in the rocks before Zachary figures out I was lying about the explosive." Crouching low, Tanner led the way to a point where he felt she would be safe. "What about the other cell phone?" Catherine asked. "I have the battery in my pocket. Now listen to me, Katie. I want you to stay right here while I try to lure Wagner into the rainforest to even the playing field. He has a gun and I don't." Catherine watched as Tanner moved out of the rocks and slipped into the darkness of the rainforest. Chapter 25. "Curse you, Tanner Nelson!" Zachary spat out as he figured he had been duped. Scrambling to his feet, he stared up at Winston. "There's no explosive at all. You will pay for this, Mr. Nelson." Zachary moved to the palm tree where Winston hung suspended. Aiming his gun at the point where the rope was tied, he fired off a shot. The rope snapped, and Winston fell with a thud. Zachary ripped the cell phone from Winston's chest, only to discover the battery missing. Only then did he strip the tape from Winston's mouth. "There's a knife in my left pocket," Winston shouted. "Cut me loose." Zachary pulled out the knife and had Winston loose within seconds. "You fool," Zachary exclaimed. "How did you let this happen?" "I never saw him coming. He had me before I knew it." "At least he's not armed," Zachary reasoned. "We've got to get that battery from him, Winston. No one even knows where we are. If we don't get this cell phone working, we could die here." "We're two men with a pistol against an unarmed man and a girl," Winston reminded him. "Don't count this man out just yet," Zachary warned. "He's a clever one. The last thing we want to do is confront him inside that rainforest. We have to find a way to lure him out here." "How are we supposed to do that, Mr. Wagner? Time is on his side, not ours." Zachary threw a nervous glance toward the rainforest. "Yeah, you're right. Time is on his side. If it comes down to a question of survival, everything we'd need is in there, not here on the beach. This pistol is our equalizer. I've used 3 shots. That leaves 6 more in the clip. However we do this, we're going to have to be darn sure not to waste another shot." Suddenly, an unexpected sound caught both men's attention. "Look," Zachary cried. "It's a chopper. I think it's one of ours." "It has to be Mel Phillips," Winston said. "He's the last pilot we have other than your son." The men moved to the center of the beach. "How are we going to handle this?" Winston asked. "We have to be careful about how much we let Mel figure out." "We'll just have to see to it that Mel never leaves the island. He can stay here and rot with the rest of them." "I don't like it, Mr. Wagner. What if they happen to be discovered?" "Good point, Winston. I'll hire a professional to come back and finish the job. You can fly them here later and dump all the bodies in the ocean." Zachary glanced up. "Right now, we have to make sure Mel spots us." The 2 men began shouting and waving. "There," Corey noted, pointing at the tiny spot on the ocean ahead of them. "There's an island just like the map indicates, but where's the smoke coming from? Is it a signal fire?" "It's no signal fire," Vincent said. "It's a downed craft, and there's 2 guys on the beach signaling to us." "It's your father, Vince. And isn't that guy with him one of your men?" "Winston Harmon. No wonder that chopper ended up in a pile of smoke if Winston was at the controls. If Dad needed a pilot, why didn't he come to me?" "Your father came here to murder Catherine, Vince. Would he have wanted you along for that?" "You're jumping to conclusions, Corey. I can't think of any reason Winston would have taken Katie the way he did, but it doesn't necessarily mean he brought her here. There's no sign of her down there." "Catherine's there somewhere, you can bet on it, and so is Tanner. You better pray they're not inside that downed chopper." "Let's say you're right about the blood on that disc, and about it containing incriminating evidence. Why does my father have to be the one under suspicion? It was Winston who drugged me and grabbed Katie." "It's possible, I suppose. But regardless, our main concern right now has to be Catherine and Tanner. They need our help, and we have little choice but to assume both your father and this Winston are the enemy. If we let down our guard and learn too late we're wrong, it could spell disaster." Corey reached for the radio mic and was about to key it when Vincent cut him off. "What are you doing?" he snapped. "What do you think? I'm calling the Coast Guard." "No, you can't do that. That would bring in the media, and you of all people should know how things get blown out of proportion once the media get involved. We'll handle this ourselves." Corey ignored Vincent and keyed the mic. Before he could speak, Vincent unsnapped the connector at the radio. "No Coast Guard, Corey. You can give me that much." "This is crazy, Vince. We're not qualified to do this alone. Let me make that call." "No, we do this my way." Corey glanced down at the 2 men on the beach. "I hate to bring this up, Vince, but your father's the one with the gun." "Maybe my father's taken Winston captive." "And maybe flies don't swarm around spilt syrup. I want to know, Vince, is your head just buried in the sand, or are you part of the problem?" "I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that," Vincent grumbled. "Don't get coy with me. You have to admit you've been acting pretty darn suspicious about this. I know your loyalty to your father, but wake up and smell the gunpowder." "All right, Corey. I guess I can't blame you for thinking what you might." "Can I call the Coast Guard?" "Let me land and see what's going on for sure. You can call them if anything goes wrong." Hearing an approaching chopper, Tanner moved quickly to the edge of the beach for a better look. "Wouldn't you know it," he huffed. "It's one of Zachary's." Chapter 26. "That's not Mel," Zachary gasped as the chopper came into view. "It's Vincent and Corey Harper." Zachary spun to face Winston. "You didn't let Vince see you grab Catherine, did you?" "I couldn't help it, Mr. Wagner. The 2 of them were together. I should have drugged Vincent first and then grabbed the woman." "You drugged my son? "You fool! You know my orders were to keep Vincent out of this. He knows you took her, and he's somehow traced you here to this island. How am I ever going to keep him from finding out what's going on? I told you I wanted it to appear as though she was on the plane with Tanner when he crashed into the ocean, and all the time you knew that wouldn't work since Vincent saw you grab her. Maybe we can make him believe we brought her here looking for Tanner's downed plane, and that she was killed in the chopper crash." Zachary considered this. It was a long shot, but thanks to Winston's bungling, it was all he had. "We can't let him see inside the wreckage," Zachary said. "We'll have to convince him to get off this island the fastest way possible." Vincent turned off the engine and shoved the radio mic under his seat and out of Corey's reach. All aircraft in Zachary Wagner's fleet were outfitted with an automatic pistol holstered on the pilot's door. Vincent pulled this from its holster and shoved it under his belt. Opening the door, he hopped out onto the beach. "Thank heavens you're here, son," Zachary said, deliberately blocking Vincent's way to the downed chopper. "There's been a terrible accident, and Winston's been hurt badly. Get back in the chopper, son. We have to get him to a hospital fast." Vincent glanced at Winston, who looked perfectly healthy. "No games, father. Tell me straight out, what have you done with Katie?" Zachary laid a hand on Vincent's shoulder. "I'm so sorry, son. Catherine didn't make it." He motioned toward the wreckage. "It's not pretty. Come on, let's get Winston to a doctor. I'll send someone back to take care of things here." In spite of his father's efforts to stop him, Vincent forced his way around. "I want to look for myself," he said. "No!" Zachary shouted, grabbing Vincent's arm. "There's nothing you can do for her." Vincent broke free and ran toward the wreckage. This was the very distraction Corey was hoping for. Fishing the mic out from under the seat, he hurriedly attached it to the radio. The sound of a gunshot pulled his attention back to Zachary, who now leveled the barrel of the gun straight at him. "That shot was just to get your attention," Zachary warned. "Step away from that chopper now." Corey dropped the mic, but spotting the keys still in the ignition, formulated a hurried plan. Carefully he eased them out and slipped them into his pocket. As he exited the chopper, he spotted Vincent lying on the beach, his head bleeding after apparently being struck by a rock still in Winston's hand. "You idiot!" Zachary shouted at Winston once he had Corey restrained. "Why did you hit my son?" "He'll be fine," Winston responded. "Other than a headache. I had to do something. Once he had seen inside the wreckage, he would have been impossible to deal with. Let me tie him up and put him in the chopper while you dispose of this one." Zachary wet his lips. "This thing is getting more complicated by the minute. How many more people do we have to kill? And how can I ever square things with my son? We'll think of something, but we can't let this one go, and we need to restrain your son before he comes to." Corey's eyes darted around at what sounded like the call of a mockingbird. This was a signal he and the other 4 musketeers had devised between themselves back in their college days. Tanner was alive, and he was out there in that forest trying to catch Corey's attention. It took only a second for Corey to spot him behind a clump of vines. Corey had to bite his lip to keep quiet. Tanner held up his hand, revealing a small rock. Using gestures, he got the message across that he wanted Corey to make a break for it when he used the rock as a distraction. Corey nodded slightly. A well-aimed throw bounced the rock off the side of the chopper. Both Zachary and Winston spun to see what had happened, just as Corey dashed for the rainforest, running a zigzag pattern just in case Zachary might shoot. 2 shots did ring out, but not before Corey heard a cry of pain followed by a streak of swear words. Corey dove for cover and rolled onto the ground behind the trunk of a large palm tree. "Over here and hurry!" Tanner called. Corey spotted him and dashed the last few yards. "What was all that ruckus back there?" he asked, trying to catch his breath. "That was Zachary," Tanner explained. "I hit him in the head with a rock just as he was about to shoot. I thought about not doing it after your little game on the radio yesterday. Sorry about that, man, but all's fair in, oh, you know. It was only right you share a little of Catherine's time with Vince." Corey took out the chopper keys and tossed them to Tanner. "Will this get me off your hook?" "You grabbed the keys?" Tanner grinned. "Way to go, Corey." "Where's Catherine?" Corey asked anxiously. "Over there in those rocks," Tanner said, pointing. "I only tell you that because you're not sitting at your mic. Who knows what kind of contest you might conjure up for anyone finding her there." "I'm telling you, we have to get out of here, Mr. Wagner," Winston said, loud enough for Tanner and Corey to hear. "If you won't tie him up, at least get him in the chopper while I get it started." "Uh-oh," Corey said. "Someone's about to discover the missing keys. I hope they don't think Vincent has them in his pocket, because if they look there, they're bound to find the pistol tucked inside his belt." Let's see if we can do something to distract them, Tanner said. Stay down, Corey, and leave this to me. Tanner stepped forward just far enough to put himself in plain view. Holding up the chopper keys, he called out, "Hello, boys, missing something? Like the keys to your chopper, perhaps?" "He's not bluffing," Winston called to Zachary. "The keys are gone." Zachary glared at Tanner, his anger well beyond the boiling point. "I want you, Tanner," he bellowed. "One way or another, I'm going to spit on your grave." "Over there," Winston suddenly pointed and said. "In those rocks, isn't it?" "Oh, no," Tanner moaned. Catherine had managed to reveal her hiding place. "I told her to stay down." "Well, Mr. Nelson," Zachary smirked, "isn't this an interesting turn of events?" Chapter 27. Catherine could have kicked herself. How could she have been so careless as to let them see her? She just wanted to know what was going on. Was that really so unreasonable? This sort of thing might be an everyday event for Tanner, but not for her. One minute she was being held prisoner, the next minute Tanner set her free, then came a chopper from out of nowhere with Vincent and Corey on board, and Zachary began shooting. Vincent was knocked out, Corey ran for cover while dodging bullets. It was enough to make anyone's head spin. Why shouldn't she be allowed to grab a peek? And how was she to know fate would turn Winston's head in her direction at the most inopportune moment? The question now was what to do next. She didn't know her way around well enough to make a run for it. She'd just have to sit tight and hope for the best. Just then, Tanner's voice forced her to look. "Wagner, it's not Catherine you want, it's me." Catherine looked on in horror at the panorama unfolding before her. Zachary and Winston were walking in her direction and had covered about half the distance when Tanner moved out into the open. "There are some things we need to discuss," Tanner propositioned. Catherine's eyes shifted to the gun in Zachary's hand. She knew he wouldn't hesitate using it if he could get off a good shot. Catherine's father had always been a bit of a gun buff who liked spending time at the shooting range. He had taken Catherine along on several occasions, enough for her to become quite familiar with certain firearms, such as the one Zachary now held. She knew it was an automatic with a 9-shot clip. According to her count, Zachary had fired off 6 shots so far, leaving him with only 3. At the distance between him and Tanner, getting off an accurate shot would be a gamble. Catherine was sure Tanner was banking on this very thing. "What's on your mind, Tanner?" Zachary asked, his voice low and cunning. "I was thinking about that little secret of yours," Tanner continued. "You know, the one you've kept so neatly swept under the rug?" Catherine noticed Zachary stiffen at hearing this. "I don't know what you're talking about," he refuted. "Oh, I think you know what I'm talking about. The secret that concerns certain, shall we say, unethical business practices at Wagner Aerospace? You're out of your mind, Tanner." "Am I? Maybe you'll think I'm out of my mind when I explain that your secret isn't a secret anymore." This brought a burst of laughter as Zachary abandoned his futile attempt at denial. "That's where you're wrong, Tanner," he stated arrogantly. "My men found your computer and the floppy disk. Close, but no cigar. Everything's been erased." Tanner's expression eased into a taunting grin. "Has it, Zachary? Or did I find a way to slip the information past your dupes before they got their hands on the evidence?" "Impossible," Zachary barked. "Let me ask you a question. Have you ever heard the song By the Time I Get to Phoenix? Because if you have, you should know that the song has strong implications for your present situation. You see, Zachary, by the time you get to Phoenix, you'll find some big changes in your world as you know it. You're going to be quite the celebrity. Your lies will get you nowhere, Tanner. Let me explain something that you might have overlooked. Dealing with men like your Conrad is second nature to me. It's what I do. Now, I'm going to tell you a story, and I'd like you to picture it in your mind as we go along. I'm working in my lab at my computer. I've just discovered some very interesting things about how you run Wagner Aerospace, as well as about what really happened to Brandon Cheney. Now picture someone showing up outside my door with the intention of breaking it open. Let's say it's Conrad. So, what do I do, Zachary? Do I just sit there wondering who it might be, or do I take action?" The look on Zachary's face left little doubt as to what was going on in his mind. Tanner had his undivided attention. He continued his explanation. "I only had about 30 seconds to act, but it was time enough. Thanks to certain pre-programmed addresses in my computer's mail system, I simply fired off a blanket email. Oh, and did I mention I included an attachment? Care to guess what was in the attachment?" "You're lying," a now shaken Zachary reaccused. I don't think so. Let's see, whose names were included in that blanket address? Oh yes, it was every lawyer who works for the Branson and Willard law firm. 10 of them altogether. All of them are smart enough to figure out what the unexpected mail in their box is all about. And they all know exactly how to handle just such a situation. Tanner glanced at his watch. By now, I figure at least 8 of the 10 have checked their mail. Tanner's smile expanded. It's like I say, Zachary. By the time you get to Phoenix, you're going to be a real celebrity. Zachary felt his mouth go dry. Tanner might be bluffing, but something about the man's demeanor told Zachary he was telling the truth. How could any of this be happening? Zachary had worked so hard getting Wagner Aerospace to the point where it was now, and he had done it all for Vincent. It wasn't fair that this man who had always stood between Vincent and the woman he loved should now be standing between Vincent and all the plans Zachary had so carefully laid out for him. Zachary did have a backup plan, but it was a plan he desperately hoped would never become necessary. To his deepest regret, it would appear it had. For years, Zachary had been using assumed names to hide away vast amounts of money in bank accounts all over the world. He'd taken great pains to ensure nothing could ever be traced back to him. He was ready at a moment's notice to vanish from sight and never be heard from again. He could live out his life in comfort and set up his son's future from behind the scenes. It would mean never being with his son again, or ever seeing his own grandchildren, a painful price that could be attributed to one man, Tanner Nelson. Even now, with Zachary giving into this secondary plan, Tanner Nelson stood squarely in the way. Tanner held the key to the only transportation off this island. Zachary weighed his options. The rules had changed. Everything centered around the keys to that chopper. Zachary knew it was Corey who had grabbed the keys, but he suspected Tanner had them now. Regardless of who had them, Tanner was the greatest threat, and the one who had to be taken out first. Neither Corey nor the girl would present much problem with Tanner out of the way. Zachary felt his heart quicken, and he wet his lips. He couldn't chance a shot from this distance. Tightening his grip on the pistol, he inched forward a step. Tanner had learned long ago to watch the eyes of an opponent. By doing this, he could predict a person's intentions with a high degree of accuracy. What he saw in Zachary was a man backed so deeply in a corner that reason had given way to desperation. Zachary's world was crumbling around him, and he was throwing caution and common sense to the wind. Tanner knew why Zachary was trying to close the gap. He only had 3 shots left. Tanner painstakingly calculated just how far he could let Zachary go before making his own move. It had come down to a battle of nerves, and Tanner was counting on nerves being the deciding element. Once the action began, it would be easier dodging the bullets of a frustrated man than one with a clear mind. Tension mounted as Zachary moved forward another step. Off in the distance, a wave broke over the already damp sand. Overhead, a seagull called out to its mate. Tanner's eyes never shifted from Zachary's. The report of a gun sent chills through Catherine. A second shot sounded almost instantly. Jumping to her feet, she spotted Zachary with a raised gun and Tanner down on one knee. "No!" she screamed, scrambling down from the rocks toward the beach. Chapter 28. The gun felt heavy in Zachary's hand. Had his bullet struck its mark? He wasn't sure, because Tanner dove to one side just as he squeezed off his shot. He wanted to step forward to see for himself if Tanner was fatally wounded, but for some reason he couldn't move. Why did his arms and legs feel so heavy? It took a few seconds for the stinging pain to register. He glanced at his chest to see a deep crimson stain on his shirt. I'm shot," he gasped in startled disbelief. Zachary's eyes lifted to see Vincent walking slowly toward him, holding a gun. "No," Zachary cried. "Not you, Vincent. How could you do this to your own father?" The gun fell from Zachary's hand, and he slumped to his knees, staring up at his son, who now stood directly above him. Dodging Zachary's first shot was child's play for Tanner, but just as he prepared to rush the man, a second shot reached his ears. "Vincent?" Tanner whispered loud enough for only himself to hear. "Why didn't you let me handle it?" Tanner knew from the blood on Zachary's shirt that the bullet had found its mark. He couldn't believe Vincent had actually shot his own father. Not that Tanner wasn't thankful it was over. He was just concerned what this might do to his friend. Tanner came to his feet just in time to spot Catherine on a dead run toward him. When she reached him, she threw her arms around him and stood there quivering and saying over and over, "I thought you were shot. I thought you were shot." Tanner could have said something to comfort her, but he didn't. Instead, he just kept still and enjoyed feeling her in his arms. He wanted to kiss her and might have done it if she hadn't beat him to it. It wasn't like any kiss they had ever shared before. This one had more meaning. He wished it didn't have to end. As their lips parted, Catherine remained in his arms, sobbing. "It's okay," Tanner said. "Everything's going to be all right." He didn't know why, but Catherine suddenly pulled away. I'm sorry," she said. "I don't know what got into me." "She loves you, Tanner," Mitzi whispered in his ear. "Admit it, you love her too." "It's no use," Brandon said dejectedly. "It's Tanner's old hang-up about commitment. He can face death and never flinch, but he can't face commitment." "Never underestimate the power of love," Mitzi countered. "He's hooked, Brandon. Take my word for it." "I hope you know what you're talking about, Mitzi, but I'll have a hard time believing it until I see him married. We're talking Tanner Nelson here." "So what are you saying, Brandon? That you just want to give up on this part of the assignment?" "No, I don't want to give up. It's just that this part of the assignment is something I'm more qualified to take charge of than you. Just be patient and do what I say. We'll get them together, Brandon. I promise." Somehow, Tanner knew this was the moment he had wished for so many times over the years of their separation, but now that it was here, he couldn't bring himself to do a thing about it. All he had to do was say 3 little words, yet why did those words come so hard? His heart ached watching her now. He knew she was thinking she had made a fool out of herself, when in reality he had loved everything about that kiss. She turned and walked toward Vincent, and the moment was gone. Reaching Zachary's side, Tanner bent down to check the wound. "It's not all that bad," he told Vincent. "I think he's going to live." Tanner then stood to face his friend. "Why'd you shoot him? I had everything under control." "Yeah, like you always do. But I couldn't take the chance." Vincent glanced down at his father. "This man's DNA may run through my veins, Tanner, but that's as far as it goes. He killed Brandon. He tried to kill you and Katie. What can I say? I've been blind, and I'm so ashamed. I'll see to it that Brandon gets a proper funeral. It's not much, but it's the least I can do." Tanner dug the chopper keys out of his pocket just as Corey stepped onto the beach, joining the others. "You up to flying that thing home, Vince? Your father does need a doctor." "Yeah, I'm up to it. Toss me the keys. I'll get it fired up while you and Corey carry him over and strap him in." "All right, hold it right there. Don't anybody move." It was Winston. In the heat of the moment, everyone had forgotten about Winston, who had grabbed the gun Vincent tossed aside after shooting his father. "I'll take those keys now." "Put that gun down," Vincent told him. "Shooting people isn't your thing, Winston." "There's a first time for everything. Give them to me or die on the spot." "Look at him, Tanner," Vincent said. "The man hates guns. I doubt he's ever fired one in his life." Tanner did notice a slight tremor in Winston's hand, but the man's eyes told a different story. He was a killer at heart. The question was, could Tanner press Winston into doing something stupid? "Toss the keys into the ocean," Tanner calmly told Vincent. "No," Winston snapped. "Try it and you die." "You'd better take a look around, Winston," Tanner spoke up. "I'm on your left, Vincent's on your right, and Corey is at your back. You might get one of us. With luck, you might even get 2, but you can't get all 3. You're not that fast. Give it up, Winston, while you still can." "Shut up. No more of your little games, Tanner. I'm not blind. I know how you feel about this woman. Anything you try, anything at all, and the first shot hits her heart. Now throw those keys over here, Vincent." "Throw them in the ocean, Vince," Tanner said. "He's going to kill us anyway. Why give him a way out?" "Stop it, Winston," Zachary said, his voice strained and barely audible. "I have money hidden away." He swallowed and grimaced in pain before going on. "I have enough for the 2 of us to live in luxury the rest of our lives. Listen to what I'm saying, Winston. Kill the others. Drop Vincent off someplace where he'll be safe. The 2 of us can simply disappear." Winston hurled a kick at Zachary, causing him to double over in pain. Even as a weakened moan escaped his lips, Zachary noticed the gun he himself had dropped lying only inches from his face. "The keys," Winston demanded again. "You've got 30 seconds before I blast the girl." Catherine was standing only feet away from Winston. Tanner knew Winston couldn't miss at this range. Unnoticed by all but Tanner, who happened to glance down, Zachary quietly reached for the gun, which still held 2 shots. Tanner slowly moved his foot between Zachary's hand and the gun. Zachary looked up, and their eyes met. There was a pleading in Zachary's eyes, an appeal that Tanner understood. Tanner gave a slight nod and moved his foot. "I warned you," Winston said, the gun still aimed at Catherine. Time's up. The sound of Zachary's shot echoed in the air. Winston let out a groan and slumped to the sand. Zachary moved the gun around and pointed it at his own head. "No, Father!" Winston cried. "That's not the way!" Tanner pulled Catherine behind him and watched as Vincent fell to one knee beside his father. "Don't, Father, please!" Zachary's voice was only a coarse whisper now. "Try to understand, son. I've lost everything. I can't live in a prison cell. This is the way I want it. You say you love me. If you do this, I'll never forgive myself. Is that what you want? To give me a lifetime of pain and guilt I can never overcome?" There was a long moment of silence as the two looked at each other. "I'll visit you, I promise," Vincent said. Vincent closed his eyes just before the gun went off. "No!" he screamed. He felt a hand on his shoulder. Opening his eyes, he saw that it was Tanner. "It's okay," Tanner said. "Winston wasn't dead. Your father finished him just as he was about to get off a shot." Vincent gazed at his father, who was still very much alive. No words passed between them. Tanner checked Winston and found no pulse. He swallowed, then spoke to Vincent. "You know what they say, all for one and one for all. I'm sorry I ever doubted you, old friend." "I'm so sorry, too," Catherine said, leaning down next to Vincent. "I know how much you love your father." "Ditto for the disc jockey," Corey added. "Still friends?" "I hope that's the last of them," Brandon remarked as he and Mitzi watched Gabe escort Winston away. "I know one thing for sure. I don't ever want a job in Gabe's department." Brandon reached out and touched Mitzi's cheek. "No way could I have ever gotten through this assignment without your help," he told her. "Thanks." "It's not over yet," Mitzi reminded him. "I have some matchmaking to do, remember?" Chapter 29. Troy Adams lay on his cell bunk reading a magazine. He glanced up to see the familiar face of Buddy Marshall grinning at him through the bars. Buddy was one of the prison guards. "It's your lucky day, Adams," Buddy quipped as he unlocked the cell. "Proctor wants to see you." "The warden?" Troy responded, tossing the magazine aside. "What's he want with me?" "He's pulling you off kitchen duty and assigning you to latrine detail," Buddy said, rolling his eyes. "How am I supposed to know what the warden wants? But the man was wearing a smile when he ordered me to bring you in. That should count for something." Troy stepped out of the cell and Buddy closed the door behind him. Together they moved down the hall past several other cells. "What did Mr. Adams do to get himself called to the warden's office?" Hank Forbes, one of the inmates, piped up. Hank was nicknamed Chattermouth for good reason. He always had something to say, and it was seldom anything of consequence. "Put a cork in it," Buddy remarked, without even giving Hank the satisfaction of a look in his direction. "You wouldn't like it if your mail just happened to get misplaced for the next couple of weeks." "Mail?" Hank retorted with a burst of gruff laughter. "Who's gonna write me? Kiss old Proctor's cheek for me while you're in there, Adams, and ask him what he's heard about my pardon." "Ignore him," Buddy said, soft enough that only Troy could hear. "It's the worst thing you can do to Hank. He hates it when his mouth fails to get him the attention he craves." Troy only smiled. Who could ever ignore Hank? Even Buddy had responded to his first remark. Hank was harmless, and he added a little color to the normally gray world belonging to those in the confines of this place. They reached the secondary security gate, and it swung open. It was a strange feeling for Troy. The only time he ever saw this gate open was when the whole bunch from his block were ushered through it at once. It looked so much bigger this way, and he half expected to hear a siren blare as he stepped through it. This brought a laugh, thinking about what prison life had done to him. He used to have thoughts and dreams of a life on the outside again. But as time went by, those things had mercifully faded into oblivion, allowing him to maintain his sanity. Dwelling on what might have been would have ripped his heart out. Those first 2 grueling years had been the worst. He was so embittered by anger back then, sure that even God had forgotten him, and he lashed out venomously at a system that would do this to him. He was innocent, but no one would listen. Appeal after useless appeal fell on deaf ears. It didn't seem to matter that the evidence convicting him was paper thin, and that there were no witnesses, no apparent motive, not even a body. All that seemed to matter was the point of view of an ambitious prosecution lawyer who refused to admit he might have twisted a few facts to prove his case. But Troy had come to realize that was just the way Rowan Kentwood operated. Once the man put someone away, it became his goal to keep them there forever, regardless of what new evidence might be uncovered. The bitterness of those first 2 years had nearly destroyed Troy, but thanks to his strong belief in the power of prayer, he had at last found the courage to turn things around. Little by little, he picked up the pieces and got back into the game of moving on. Not that prison ever became enjoyable, that could never happen, but once the bitterness had subsided, Troy realized God hadn't really forsaken him at all. Even here in this tiny cell, there was still rich meaning to his life. Self-pity was replaced by newfound ambition. Troy set his sights on what seemed to most an unattainable goal. It took 4.5 years of grueling work, but he earned his law degree from right within the confines of his own cell. And he didn't let the degree go to waste. He had now helped 3 fellow prisoners secure an early release by convincing the parole board they were ready. "Come in, young man," Alan Proctor said as Buddy and Troy arrived at his office. "And relax. You're not here because of anything bad." Troy hadn't known of any negative reason for the warden wanting to see him, but having it verified did bring a degree of relief. "Will you be needing me any longer, Warden?" Buddy asked. "No, Buddy. That'll be all for now." Proctor pointed to a chair in front of his desk. "Have a seat, Troy." As Troy sat down, he noticed the warden had been holding a document, which he now laid aside. "I'm really proud of you, Troy," the warden said. "You've become one of our model prisoners. Truth be known, you've become the model prisoner in our ranks. If all my inmates here were half as cooperative as you, my job would be a snap." Proctor picked up a pencil, then leaning back in his chair, he rolled it between his forefinger and thumb. "The reason I've asked you here," he continued, "is to tell you you're being moved to another facility." Troy wasn't sure he had heard right. "Another facility?" he echoed. "I'm not at liberty to give you all the details just yet, for security reasons, you know, but I can tell you that this transfer comes by order of the governor." "The governor? What could the governor possibly care about me, Warden?" "Sorry, Troy, no details for now. You'll just have to be patient. Now listen to what I'm about to tell you. When it comes to transporting prisoners outside these walls, I have a few rules. In your case, I could overlook these rules, but that wouldn't be setting the best precedent. You can see my point, can't you, Troy?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Then here are my rules, all 3 of them. Handcuffs, leg cuffs, and a blindfold. That about covers it, unless you have questions." "Just one, Warden. What about my personal things, in my cell?" "I'll see to your personal items myself. You have my word I'll get them all securely back into your hands." Both men stood and the warden offered his hand. Troy readily accepted the handshake, but it certainly felt strange. In all his dealings with the warden, there had never been a handshake. "Good luck," Proctor said, "and hang on tight to that good attitude of yours. It'll take you a long way, wherever you may end up." Troy felt a curious sadness, realizing this could be the last he'd ever see of Alan Proctor. Why should he care? Proctor was just a warden in a prison where Troy didn't belong in the first place. But strangely, he did care. "I know you probably hear this from all your guests, Warden, but in my case, it's true. I didn't kill Brandon Chaney." "I know that, Troy. I've known it all along." The warden's response couldn't have caught Troy more off guard. "Thanks," was all he managed to say. The warden pressed a button on his desk, and 2 guards entered the room. "Take good care of this man," the warden directed, "and don't snap the cuffs any tighter than necessary." Chapter 30. Try as he might, Troy could make no sense of any of this. What interest could the governor possibly have in him? Where were they transporting him? And why was it taking so long to get there? With the blindfold on, he couldn't see a clock in the car or even the position of the sun, but he estimated they'd been on the road no less than 3 hours by the time the car made its final stop. The door next to him opened, and he got a sudden whiff of pines. Did Arizona have a new prison facility in the mountains? Not that he'd heard of. He felt an arm on his shoulder, and the guard's voice was the first he had heard since being driven away from the prison. "Just relax, Troy. Step out and lean on me. I'm not permitted to remove the blindfold just yet, so I'll have to be your eyes for now." Troy felt the guard release the snap on his seatbelt. Moving his legs around, he exited the car and allowed the guard to lead him away from it. "There's 5 steps right in front of you," the guard said. "Just take them one at a time and you'll be all right." Troy counted the steps as he climbed them, and then stopped. "What's going on?" he asked. "We're here," the guard responded. "I suppose you'd like those cuffs off about now, eh?" "What do you think?" Troy laughed. "I've just ridden 3 hours with these things biting at my ankles and wrists. Yeah, I want them off." Troy could swear he heard the fellow stifle a laugh. "It was only 2.5 hours, he said, as he removed the cuffs, giving Troy back the use of his arms. The leg cuffs were removed next. "Okay," the guard said. "You can take that thing off your eyes." Troy pulled it away and blinked 3 or 4 times as his eyes adjusted to the light. Within moments he found himself staring at a giant banner with the words "Welcome Home, Troy," printed in bold red letters. What the? He gasped, realizing he was on the doorstep of Zachary Wagner's mountain cabin. Why have you brought me here? Troy's only answer was applause, cheers, whistles, and scattered shouts of, "Way to go, buddy!" Somewhere in the background, a trumpet blared a loud off-key note. Glancing through the open door before him, he saw hordes of people all smiling at him. Some had tears in their eyes. Tanner was there, as well as Vincent and Corey. Troy could hardly contain himself when he spotted Catherine. There were so many others, it was impossible to count them all. "What is this?" he choked out. "Am I dreaming?" Tanner, Vincent, and Corey all reached him at the same time. There were so many shoulder punches and back slaps, Troy thought he might be bowled over. "If I am a dream," Corey shouted in his face, "I'm the ugliest dream you'll ever wake from. Welcome home, buddy." "You never did pay up that $5 you owe me," Tanner chided. "Don't think I've forgotten it either." Vincent grabbed Troy by the arm and led him inside the room. "Don't pay any attention to Tanner," he said. "I'll make good the $5 myself. Right now, we have some partying to do, and since you're the guest of honor, you have to make a speech." Troy's head was spinning. "Is this still your father's cabin?" he asked. "Actually, it's my cabin now, but that's a story you've yet to hear. What better place to celebrate your first day of freedom than the place you celebrated your last? The graduation party, remember?" Troy stopped in his tracks and stared at Vincent. "My first day of freedom?" he said weakly. "What are you saying, Vince?" "He's saying the governor signed your pardon," came a familiar voice from behind. Troy turned to see Warden Alan Proctor. "Remember that document I was holding when you came in my office?" the warden asked. "It was your pardon, Troy." Proctor handed Troy the paper. I've been pardoned?" he asked in disbelief, staring at the document. "Yes, you have," the warden assured. "And you should see what Rowan Kentwood looks like with a mouthful of crow feathers. He's been on every news channel and the front page of every newspaper in the valley. He's the laughingstock of the town, Troy, and well he should be. Oh, and by the way, I'd like to clear the air on one thing. The cuffs and blindfold weren't really my idea. You have 3 very special friends, I think you can guess who they are, who insisted on that part. I was the one who chauffeured you here, though. I hope it was a smooth enough ride. I gave it my best." Troy still couldn't make himself believe this was real. "But how could I have been pardoned," he asked, "with no new evidence to support my case?" The warden laughed. "Enjoy the party, Troy. There'll be time enough to hear about the new evidence after you've finished all the cake you can eat." "Enough of this," Vincent said, pushing Troy forward again. "We want a speech." Suddenly, Troy found himself in front of a mic, staring out over the throng of well-wishers. The whole room instantly turned silent. Troy swallowed and let his eyes slowly scan the room full of people staring back at him. I don't really know what to say," he stammered. "This is Corey Harper's sort of thing, not mine." "He's right," Corey yelled out. "Enough of this jabbering. Let's party." Corey started clapping. A moment later, Tanner joined in, then Vincent. Soon the whole room exploded in another round of roaring applause. Troy's heart leapt as he spotted Catherine walking his way. He had no idea what she was up to until she planted a kiss right on his lips. "That's my welcome home," she told him as the applause grew even louder. "The guys have laid out some clothes for you in one of the bedrooms upstairs, the one with the big red X on the door. Go get changed and I'll save you a dance." Halfway up the stairs, Troy paused to look out over the party that was now in full swing below him. This had to be one of 2 things. Either it was the happiest dream ever, or it was the happiest day of his life. He still wasn't sure which. Mitzi brushed aside a tear. "You did yourself proud, Brandon," she sniffled. "You can put one more part of your assignment in the file drawer, and let me thank you again for allowing me to be part of it. Having you along for the ride was my pleasure, believe me, Mitzi, and I learned a bunch about this guardian angel thing along the way. I have to say, it's more fun than the records department. Ever think about requesting a transfer?" "Can I do that?" "Of course you can. It's done all the time. Angels have rights." "We do? I mean, of course we do. I think I'll speak to my supervisor tomorrow." Mitzi beamed at thoughts of Brandon working in her department. Maybe she could pull some strings to get him assigned to her district. It was something to think about. "So," Brandon asked, with just a hint of sadness in his voice, after looking around at all his friends one last time, "are you ready to report back in and call this assignment done?" Mitzi shook her head. "I haven't finished yet," she said. "Mitzi, be realistic. Tanner is a lost cause in the romance department. He has completely shied away from Catherine since she kissed him on the island 2 days ago. The rest of my assignment was a success. Why not let it end on that note?" No deal, Brandon, Mitzi said, seeing Catherine on one side of the room and Tanner on the opposite. Come on, we have work to do. Catherine watched Troy climb the stairs and disappear down the hall at the top. She almost wished she hadn't said she'd save him a dance. Not that she wasn't happy to see him, but all she really wanted to do was get as far away from this party and Tanner Nelson as possible. She had made a fool out of herself over him for the last time. What wasn't meant to be just wasn't meant to be, even if it meant a broken heart. She had already made arrangements to vacate his apartment just as soon as her new apartment came available in a day or two. Staying away from him while living in the room next door might not prove all that easy, although he hadn't done one thing to bother her since returning from the island where all the excitement had happened. Why had she ever kissed him like that? It was stupid. She'd never do it again, and that she knew for sure. So why did she keep hearing this little voice telling her to go over and talk with him now? There was no way she was about to listen. Still, it was a tempting idea. What could it hurt, just telling him goodbye one last time? She wouldn't have to get mushy or anything. She could just keep it businesslike. "No, I won't do it," Catherine suddenly blurted out, without even thinking who might be listening. She felt instantly like a fool when she realized Corey had just stepped up. "Won't do what?" Corey asked. Nothing," she excused. "I don't know why I said that." "You want to dance?" Catherine tried to laugh. "You're sure your wife won't mind?" "How can she when she's over there dancing with Tanner?" Catherine looked to see Tanner and Stephanie in the center of the dance floor. She felt Corey take her hand and allowed him to lead her onto the dance floor. "So," Corey said, making small talk, "what do you think of Vince? You know, the way he's taking this thing about learning what kind of man his dad really is." "I'd say he's taking it pretty well," Catherine answered. "I've never seen a man more devoted to his father than Vincent. It must have been a terrible blow when he was forced to face the truth." "Yeah, and in a strange way, the old man is nuts about Vincent. I, for one, am glad he's been exposed. Vincent's better off that way." "I think Vincent knows that now, Corey, but he's still a dedicated son. He's trying to get a plea bargain worked out for Zachary to plead guilty to murder on all counts in order to avoid the death penalty." "I guess that's a good thing," Corey conceded. "Vince doesn't condone what his father did, and he's doing everything he can to make things right with Wagner Aerospace. I guess not completely turning his back on the old man is commendable, and I'm betting if Brandon had any input, he'd go along with Vince." "Somehow I know you're right about that, Corey." Catherine was about to say something else, but was cut short when Corey managed to push her into another dancer. "I'm sorry," she said, even before turning to see who it was. When she did look, it brought a gasp. Tanner. Corey had done it on purpose. Boy, was he in trouble when she got him alone. "Wow, Tanner," Corey commented. "Who's this looker you're dancing with? Mind if I cut in?" Tanner stepped aside, and Corey hurriedly swept his wife away. After a long, awkward moment, Tanner bit the bullet and asked, "You want to dance or something?" Catherine didn't know where the courage came from, but for once in her life she faced the problem of Tanner Nelson straight on. "No, I don't want to dance. I want to talk. Can we step out onto the patio?" Tanner looked surprised, but she didn't care. "All right," he said. Then, taking her by the hand, he led her through the double doors to a remote corner of the patio. "Will this do?" he asked. "Yes," she responded. "So, what do you want to talk about?" The little voice in her head had become increasingly insistent that she tell him exactly what was on her mind. She knew what that was, and she was past the point of sidestepping it. "Let me ask you a question," she began. "That morning at the restaurant, you know, before I left for Australia?" She paused, giving him time to catch up. "At Denny's?" he responded. "What about it?" She continued quickly before she lost her courage. "You had a ring in your pocket. I want to know, Tanner Nelson, was that really meant for a joke, or had you intended to propose that morning?" Tanner nearly choked. Composing himself, he leaned against the railing with his hands cupped in front of him and his head lowered. "It wasn't a joke," he said. "Then why didn't you do it?" Because why?" "Because you would have turned me down." "You don't know that. You didn't give me a chance to respond. You were moving to Australia, Katie, and you didn't bother telling me until just hours before your flight. What does that have to do with anything? So I was moving to Australia. Would that have stopped me from saying yes?" Tanner managed to laugh. "You were there 8 years. That sounds like a long engagement by any stretch of the imagination." "I was there 8 years because I was afraid to come home. I had no idea what I'd find. You refused to answer my letters, and you never called me even once." Her voice took on a hurt tone. "Why didn't you answer my letters? I want to at least know that." "I didn't answer your letters because I didn't want to interfere in your new life. I didn't want you to feel tied down to me." Catherine stepped up behind Tanner, and he twisted around just enough to show his face without actually looking at her. "Are you saying if I had proposed, you might not have stayed 8 years in Australia?" Her voice dropped a level. "That's exactly what I'm saying. I might have stayed 6 months, maybe even 8. Just long enough to be sure my folks were going to be okay. Then I would have come home. What about your teaching job? Okay, I might have ended up teaching 1 year, but then I would have come home." Catherine moved around next to him, forcing him to straighten and face her. "You know what I think," she said. "I think you knew I'd come home if you proposed to me. I think you used my going to Australia as an excuse not to propose. I have no idea how our relationship ever got as far as you buying a ring, but with your aversion to commitment, I'm betting you were looking for a way out. If it hadn't been for my going to Australia, it would have been something else." "That's not true. I don't have an aversion to commitment." "Ha! And I was going to propose that night. Double ha!" Catherine was floored as she watched Tanner dig a little black box out of his pocket, one that looked exactly like the one from that night. "What's that?" she gasped. "It's the ring," he admitted. "The same one?" "Yeah, the same one. I nearly broke the bank to buy this thing back then. I wasn't about to get rid of it." Catherine felt her heart race as she looked at the little black box. "Why did you bring it here today?" she asked. Tanner turned back to face the garden. "I don't know." "You brought it with the idea of asking me to marry you right here at this party. Am I right?" "I suppose I did." Catherine waited for something else besides "I suppose I did," but Tanner just stood there looking off into the sunny afternoon sky. "Oh, I get it," she said at length. "You were looking for another way out, and this discussion was all it took. More aversion to commitment." Catherine was crying, but she couldn't help it. If she thought Tanner Nelson would ever come around to the point of proposing, she was just kidding herself. He wasn't the marrying kind, never had been, and never would be. Well, this would be the last chance he'd ever have to break her heart. She straightened and stared at him. "I'm going to tell you something, Tanner Nelson. You see those doors right over there?" She pointed to the doors leading back inside the cabin. "I'm going to turn around, and I'm going to walk right through them. You have until I take 1 step inside to make up your mind. If I make it that far without hearing a certain question from your lips, you'll never get the chance to ask it again. You think about that." Catherine drew a deep breath, turned to face the doors, and took a slow step forward. She closed her eyes and hoped to feel his hand on her shoulder. Nothing. She took another step and paused. Still nothing. Not the touch of his hand, not one sound from his lips. She took another step, then another. She opened her eyes to see the doors looming in front of her. What had she done? Putting Tanner on the spot like this was pure insanity. But she had declared her word, and backing down wasn't an option. She inched her way toward the door, reaching it only after what seemed like an eternity. She wanted to look back, but there was no looking back now. Hot tears flooded onto her cheeks as she grabbed the knob and pulled the door open. "Goodbye, Tanner," she whispered. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." She drew another breath and started to step through the opening. "Everyone, I want your attention." What was that? It came from the loudspeakers, and it sounded like... Catherine moved a step forward where she could see the stage. "What?" She choked over her tears. "How did he—" It was Tanner. He had somehow gotten past her, and he was standing at the stage holding the mic. How had he done it? Impossible for anyone but Tanner Nelson, she quietly sobbed to herself. "I have something I want everyone in the room to hear," Tanner said into the mic. "My only regret is that there aren't television cameras carrying it to the rest of Arizona." Catherine could only stare through watery eyes. Tanner removed the black box again, this time opening it. "I have something here," he said. "It's for the most beautiful woman in the world, if she'll take it. I've seen a lot of this world, so I figure that qualifies me to know she's the most beautiful." "What are you doing?" Catherine called to him. "Are you trying to propose?" A hush filled the room as all eyes shifted back to Tanner. "Will you have me, Katie?" he asked. "I don't know," she sobbed. "Why do you want to marry me?" "Because you're beautiful." "Why else?" "Because you're Katie Dalton." "That's not good enough. Why else do you want to marry me?" "Because he loves you, Katie," Vincent called out, drawing a laugh from the crowd. "And because you love him too. Tell the man yes so we can get on with the party." "I want to hear it from him." "Why do you want to marry me, Tanner Nelson?" Tanner shoved the mic back in the holder and started toward Catherine. She was crying and laughing at the same time as he approached her. He stopped only inches away. "Because I love you, Katie Dalton, and because I can't stand the thought of living one more day without you." He lifted her hand to slide on the ring. "Now, will you marry me?" Catherine threw her arms around him as the sound of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony filled the room. She wasn't sure whether it came from the band or just from her heart, but it didn't matter. Their lips met, and suddenly her world became more beautiful than all the symphonies ever written. "You did it, Mitzi!" Brandon cried. "I don't know how, but you did it." "Yes," Mitzi sniffed. "Talk about a three-tissue box ending! Have you ever seen anything more beautiful in your life, Brandon?" "No, can't say that I have. Not in life as a mortal or as an angel." He stepped around to face her. Too bad Tanner was wrong. "What?" "About him getting the most beautiful woman. He only got second best." Mitzi wiped an eye and looked back at Brandon. "Who's the first?" she asked. "A certain angel I know," he beamed. "How would you like to go to dinner with me? I know this great place called the Paradise Palace. They have a chef there, Jason Hackett, I think his name is. Talk about out-of-this-world dining." Mitzi couldn't get her yes out fast enough. To think that Brandon thought she was beautiful. Life as an angel was always good, but never quite as good as at this very moment. Slipping her arm through his, she allowed him to escort her through the luminous door that opened to take them home to the world of angels.
We hope you have enjoyed the presentation. Dan Yates would enjoy hearing from his listeners. You can write to him, care of Covenant Communications, P.O. Box 416, American Fork, Utah 84003. To receive additional information on Covenant products, visit our website at www.covenant-lds.com.
"It's like they say about riding a bicycle. You never forget." "You're doing just fine, Winston," Zachary assured the man. Zachary pointed through the window. "You see that beautiful little island up ahead, Miss Dalton? That will become your final resting place. A very lovely spot, don't you agree?" Catherine sank lower in her seat as a feeling of complete helplessness tightened around her. The pilot had claimed to be rusty, and his landing proved him right. It was a rough one. Once they were on the ground, Zachary removed her handcuffs. "I see no reason to force any unnecessary discomfort on you, Miss Dalton. I take no joy in your demise. If it's any comfort, they say drowning is actually quite painless." "You are a monster," she spit out. "Think what you will, Miss Dalton, but I've designed the perfect execution chamber. I'll never be found out." Zachary removed the pistol from his belt and cocked the breech, injecting a shell into the chamber. "Just a precaution," he explained. Then he instructed Winston. "Stay with the chopper. Miss Dalton and I will only be a moment." "You may think you've gotten away with your little game," Catherine boldly stated as he forced her ahead of him across the beach. "But you made a mistake when you came up against Tanner Nelson. I promise you he figured out a way to let someone know the things he learned about you. Count on it." Zachary suddenly froze in his tracks. "What the—" he gasped, staring at what was left of the boulder that had once blocked the cave entrance. Catherine instantly picked up on this. "Well now," she said, taking courage, "do we have a problem?" At that instant, the air was shattered by the sound of a tremendous explosion. Whirling around, Zachary suddenly turned ash gray. "The chopper!" he gasped, seeing it in flames. "What happened?" "Tanner's alive!" Catherine cried. "Come and get me! I'm growing tired of bad company!" "Shut up!" Zachary snapped, gripping Catherine's arm tighter and forcing her back in the direction of the blazing chopper. "Winston!" he bellowed. "Where are you?" A muffled sound from overhead caught both Catherine's and Zachary's attention. Looking up, they spotted Winston dangling by a rope tossed over the stem of a palm frond. He was halfway up the tree, bound and gagged with duct tape. "Oops!" Tanner could only wonder how much good the call to Corey had done. It had cut off before he could get much out. There was no reason he couldn't survive on this island as long as necessary. There were plenty of roots he could eat, and he figured he'd be able to catch crabs and small sea life off the rocks close to shore. Fire wouldn't be a problem for an experienced camper like him. Chapter 24. Catherine had had headaches before, but never one like this. She wanted to rub her eyes, but couldn't move her hands. It took a moment for her to realize why. She was handcuffed. What had happened? There was a man with a sharp needle, and she noticed there was someone in the seat next to her now. "Welcome back, Miss Dalton," this man said. His voice sounded hollow, like an old phonograph record played at slow speed. "Wake up," Catherine told herself. "Make this fog go away and wake up." She narrowed her eyes, trying to focus. Who was this man? He was someone she should know, but who? With great effort, she managed a question. "Who are you?" "I see no reason for not answering your question at this point, Miss Dalton. I'm Zachary Wagner." The name hit with sobering impact. Catherine had never met Zachary Wagner, but she had seen him on the news numerous times. "Why am I wearing handcuffs?" she asked. "The cuffs are merely a precaution. You have no idea how badly I feel about you stumbling onto information you had no business seeing. I'm entirely aware of my son's feelings for you, and I had hoped someday to welcome you into the family. Killing you is going to bring me great pain, but my dear, it would seem you leave me no other choice." "You murdered Brandon," she said. "And Tanner, you've murdered him, haven't you?" "They left me no choice either, Miss Dalton." The pilot spoke up. "That's the island just up ahead, Mr. Wagner. We'll be on the ground in about 5 minutes. Catherine couldn't be certain, as all she could see of the pilot was his profile, but she strongly suspected he was the man who had drugged her in Vincent's car. "I haven't flown one of these things in years," the pilot continued. "But," Catherine jabbed, "looks like Tanner got to your boy." "Shut up," Zachary barked, removing a cell phone from his blazer pocket. "I'm still in charge here as long as I have you where I can put a bullet in your skull." Zachary was doing a juggling act, trying to hold Catherine, the gun, and dial the phone all at the same time. Catherine was wise enough to know he didn't dare kill her now, not with her being his only ticket out of this predicament. She made a quick decision, and in a lightning-fast move she yanked the phone from his hand and heaved it into the flaming helicopter. "You little witch!" Zachary bellowed. "Losing our temper, are we?" she asked, refusing to let up. "I know you're out there, Tanner!" Zachary yelled. "Show yourself or I'll kill the girl!" A rock struck the top of a palm tree, then fell to the ground, pulling Zachary's attention to a spot near them. He strained for a look. "What the?" he gasped. "Is that—" Refusing to lower his gun, he forced Catherine over for a closer look. "It's Conrad's chopper," he muttered at the discovery. "They never made it off the island." "Now you know," came Tanner's voice from behind them. Catherine spun to see him standing beside a large rock about 25 feet up the side of a small mountain. Zachary raised his gun and fired off 2 shots, which only ricocheted harmlessly away as Tanner easily ducked behind the rock. "So help me, Tanner," Zachary demanded. "If you don't show yourself, I will kill her." Tanner replied with confidence. "Katie's your shield, Wagner. Lose your shield and you'll never get off this island alive. By the way, Katie, thanks for depriving Wagner of his cell phone. I figured on having to do that myself." "Glad I could help," she half laughed and half sobbed. "Take a look at your cohort dangling from that tree," Tanner continued. "There's a cell phone taped to his shirt. That phone could be your only ticket off this island. But I've tucked away an explosive inside your fellow's pocket. I have my thumb against the detonator now. Care to talk trade, your cohort and the phone for Katie? Don't destroy the cell phone. We'll talk." "How touching," Tanner laughed. "So much concern for your man's safety. Here's the way we do this. You release Katie and let her walk to me. I have to get you higher up in the rocks before Zachary figures out I was lying about the explosive." Crouching low, Tanner led the way to a point where he felt she would be safe. "What about the other cell phone?" Catherine asked. "I have the battery in my pocket. Now listen to me, Katie. I want you to stay right here while I try to lure Wagner into the rainforest to even the playing field. He has a gun and I don't." Catherine watched as Tanner moved out of the rocks and slipped into the darkness of the rainforest. Chapter 25. "Curse you, Tanner Nelson!" Zachary spat out as he figured he had been duped. Scrambling to his feet, he stared up at Winston. "There's no explosive at all. You will pay for this, Mr. Nelson." Zachary moved to the palm tree where Winston hung suspended. Aiming his gun at the point where the rope was tied, he fired off a shot. The rope snapped, and Winston fell with a thud. Zachary ripped the cell phone from Winston's chest, only to discover the battery missing. Only then did he strip the tape from Winston's mouth. "There's a knife in my left pocket," Winston shouted. "Cut me loose." Zachary pulled out the knife and had Winston loose within seconds. "You fool," Zachary exclaimed. "How did you let this happen?" "I never saw him coming. He had me before I knew it." "At least he's not armed," Zachary reasoned. "We've got to get that battery from him, Winston. No one even knows where we are. If we don't get this cell phone working, we could die here." "We're two men with a pistol against an unarmed man and a girl," Winston reminded him. "Don't count this man out just yet," Zachary warned. "He's a clever one. The last thing we want to do is confront him inside that rainforest. We have to find a way to lure him out here." "How are we supposed to do that, Mr. Wagner? Time is on his side, not ours." Zachary threw a nervous glance toward the rainforest. "Yeah, you're right. Time is on his side. If it comes down to a question of survival, everything we'd need is in there, not here on the beach. This pistol is our equalizer. I've used 3 shots. That leaves 6 more in the clip. However we do this, we're going to have to be darn sure not to waste another shot." Suddenly, an unexpected sound caught both men's attention. "Look," Zachary cried. "It's a When she reaches the large rock face just below me, I'll toss the detonator onto the beach. Oh, I didn't mention the detonator has a timing device on it, did I? I'll set the timer for 10 seconds. That should give you sufficient time to retrieve it and figure out how the disarming mechanism works." 10 seconds? Zachary gasped. "That's absurd. I need more time." "Put the gun down and I'll give you 30 seconds. Very slowly, Zachary bent down and laid the gun on the sand close to his feet. "Okay, now let Katie step far enough away so you can't grab her." Catherine pulled free and moved forward 3 very large steps. "Hold it," Zachary shouted. "No further. Not until I see that detonator." Tanner emerged from behind the rock. "Are we ready to do this?" he asked. "Throw down the detonator," Zachary barked. "On the count of 3, Tanner instructed. "When you hear me say 3, run faster than you've ever run before, Katie. 1, 2... Catching both Catherine and Zachary off guard, Tanner suddenly said, "I lied about the extra time. The detonator is set for 10 seconds. At the same time, as he cried, 3, he tossed something into the wake of an incoming wave. Catherine broke for the rock as Zachary's grunt told her he had grabbed the gun and was headed for the detonator. "This is unbearable," Brandon moaned. "All we can do is stand here watching. Why didn't the authorities give me an angelic zap gun so I could help save her?" "Angels don't use guns," Mitzi chided. "How about a sword, then?" "You're not that kind of angel, Brandon. Trust me, Tanner and Catherine will be fine. We both know Tanner's bomb is a bluff. What's to keep the jerk from shooting her?" "Zachary doesn't know it's a bluff, but won't he be surprised when he finds nothing but a rock?" Brandon looked to see Zachary frantically splashing through the water on his hands and knees while Catherine had already reached the rock, but he still couldn't help worrying about Zachary's gun. "Jump, Katie, grab my hand," Tanner cried to Catherine as she reached the rock. "It's okay, you're safe now," he said after pulling her up. "I thought you were dead," she sobbed. He wiped her face with his handkerchief. "You okay?" "I'm okay," she sniffed. "Good. We have